Welcome to the distance learning program presented by Innobus on Struts framework. Before knowing Struts framework, it's very important to know all about MVC architecture, which we call as Model View Controller. In MVC architecture, model represents the domain-specific representation of the information on which the application operates. It means that any business-related logic, for example, calculation of your shopping cart items in shopping application, banking logic in banking application, and all those total taxes for income tax applications, so etc. Many more applications which deals with business logic are to be coded in this model layer, which is also termed as application logic layer. The view, it renders the model into a form suitable for interaction, typically a user interface element. And then we have a controller, processes and responds to events. Typically, user actions and also may invoke changes on the model and view. So this controller is the entry point where it will act for your events connecting to model and also getting the result back to the view. So this is all about MVC architecture. To go in detail, this diagram represents how the request and response pass through model view controller layers of MVC architecture. So here the user interacts with the user interface in any way. It can be a JSP page, HTML page or JSF, any kind of JSP pages which are mainly used for view. So the user interacts for the user interface, and after interacting, a controller handles the input event from the user interface, often through a registered handler or a callback. The controller accesses the model, possibly updating it in a way appropriate to the user's action. So the complex controller are often structured using command patterns. So these are all the design patterns which are used for controller layers. And finally, a view uses the model to generate an appropriate user interface. So the view gets its own data from the model. The model has no direct knowledge of the view, and therefore the user interface waits for further user interaction, which begins the cycle or a request as a new. So this is how the data flows from request to response through these MVC layers, so which we generally name as model view controller architecture. Now, so that we saw what is this MVC architecture, now is the Struts framework. And here the Struts framework works on MVC architecture. So what is this framework? Framework is a set of classes and interfaces that cooperate to solve a specific type of software problem. This is the generic term or the specification for framework. And Struts is one of that framework, which makes easy for learning as well as developing an application. So the Struts framework was created by Craig McLennan and donated to ASF in 2000. Struts is a popular and mature web application framework based on MVC design pattern or architecture, what we call as. The web work framework and the Struts community, these two are separate communities which join together to create Struts 2 framework. And Struts 2 framework onwards, we have our latest version. So current version will be 2.3.8, and again this version has got many advanced features in it. This is the basic architecture or the diagram web flow, how we can implement using Struts framework. And this is the typical diagram which was got from org-apache.struts site. And here there is one change where the filter dispatcher can be replaced with later version, which we get the filter from ng or apache.struts2.ng.filter. In this, we get a latest filter called as struts prepare and execute filter. This should be used replacing filter dispatcher. Filter dispatcher is deprecated on 1.2 onwards. So after which we need to use the latest filter. So to begin with the flow of this framework, the life cycle of structs begin with the request sent from client. So the client receives the request through the browser. So after which the result invoke the servlet container, which in turn pass through a standard filter chain. So if you have seen, there are so many filters which is passed through the HTTP servlet request. And after receiving this request, the servlet container will send this HTTP servlet request across this many filters which we are seeing here, and one among is the filter which I spoke just now will be struts prepare and execute filter. After which the struts prepare and execute filter will be called, which consults the action mapper to determine whether an action should be invoked. So if the action mapper finds an action to be invoked, then the filter dispatcher in this diagram replaced with struts prepare and execute filter will delegate the control to action proxy. The action proxy then reads the configuration file such as struts.xml. Action proxy then creates an instance of action invocation class and then delegates the control. The action invocation is responsible for command pattern implementation. It invokes the interceptors one by one. So if you see here, there are many interceptors 1, 2, 3, which will be invoked one by one. So we will talk about what are interceptors in our further course. Then next, the action returns the action invocation, which is responsible for looking up the proper result associated with the action result code mapped in struts.xml, which is the configuration file. Then again, the interceptors are executed in reverse order. Once you get the action result, these interceptors will again be executed in reverse order and the response is returned to the filter. Finally, the result is then sent to the servlet container, which in turn sends it back to the client through HTTP servlet response. And this is the basic diagram which depicts or says about structs framework workflow, and we will talk about each and every part of this in our further course. Struts framework features. So you can call these features as benefits as well, because struts later versions have got many benefits for developing any enterprise level applications. So we'll see the features. First is POJO forms and POJO actions. So it means that struts 2 has done away with action forms. So there are no action forms in strut 2 version onwards. Therefore, the POJO forms and POJO action itself says it's a plain old Java object. There is no need to implement or extend any kind of classes or interfaces. This is one of the main and advantage feature of struts 2 framework onwards. There is another feature called tag support. Struct 2 has improved in the form of tags and also new tags which has been added to write less code. There is an Ajax tag support also. Struct 2 has given this Ajax tags where we can use in Ajax development. Easy integration with other frameworks like Spring, Tiles and Sitemesh and many more. All these are different frameworks which can easily integrate using this struts framework for front-end development. So structs is also easily integrable. Template support for generating views using templates. Plugin support. The core struct2 behavior can be enhanced and the use of plugins are provided in more during these structs 2.x later versions onwards. Profiling. So it's a integrated profiling to debug and also the profile for the application. In addition to this, structs also integrated debugging will help to build debugging tools. Continuing with the features, we have easy to modify tag, which means the tag markups in struct2 can be tweaked using free marker templates. So this does not require any kind of JSP or Java language. The basic HTML or XML and CSS knowledge is enough to modify the tags. So this is also one more important advantage. Promote less configuration. The structs 2, the later versions has got annotations which can completely try to avoid all the configuration files using these annotations. View technologies, it has got great support for multiple view options. So when we saw MVC architecture, in Struct framework, the view options can be JSP, JSF, Velocity, Free Marker, XS, LT, and many more. So there is Struct 2.2 which has got included, which says that OGNL, this is Object Graphic Notation Language. This version has also got increased for 3.0, and this is also one of the feature of Struct framework. There is a Maven dependency, and then snapshot repository. So these are some of the major advantages or features of Structs framework. Next we have an environment setup. So for basic setup where we can run our Structs development or applications require Java installation and Java environment setup. So we need to have JDK installed. It is always better to have later versions of JDK. So currently there is 1.6 which is added. Now there are many versions coming up, 1.8, 1.9. So you can always upgrade the versions of your Java installations. Step 2, installing Tomcat. Again, installing Tomcat server should be later versions. So there is Tomcat 7 version which can be used for later. Set up Catalina Home. Once you have installed the Tomcat latest version, the Tomcat 7 has been installed for this training. So you have to set up Catalina Home in your environment variable, which we do in My Computers environment variable. So the path variable should also be set, after which the struct2 libraries need to be downloaded. So you can download those libraries which are of latest versions using this site, which will give you the latest version of libraries. So once you download, you can unzip in any of the drive or folder and then select specific jar files for your application. Step 4, you can have your integrated development environment. Currently we use Eclipse in this course. So these are the basic environment setup for Structs development application. So you can get this Eclipse in this site. So next we have some configuration files which are required for structs to be functional. So we do need configuration files like structs config, structs.xml. We'll see what are those configuration files. So these are some of the few configuration files which are necessary to make your struct application work. First is the web.xml. which is generally the deployment descriptor file which we have to put in web-inf folder in web application, where you get web-inf folder within which you have to place this web.xml file. Struts.xml. So this is also one of the configuration file which are used for struts framework. So this you can place it in web-inf/classes folder. Struts.properties. So these are also XMLs which are related for framework properties. Struts-default.xml, and this is important for interceptors to get the default behaviors of interceptors. So this you can find in the jar file struts-do-core.jar, which will be added in lib. So this jar file will give the benefit of your struts-default.xml configuration file. And like this we have many configuration files. But first four are major which are required for our struts applications. So now though we have seen configuration files and environment setup, we can demonstrate small application which shows you the features involved in struct application using these configuration files. So let's do the demo for first struts application. So to demonstrate simple strut application involving the configuration files which we have seen currently. So to creating the struct application, we need to create dynamic web project. So once you have project name defined, let's give as hello world. You can see Apache Tomcat has been used as a server, and then there is the generate web.xml deployment descriptor. So since we need to have web.xml in struct framework, let's check this and finish. So this is the basic structure of struct application. Here you have web content within which web-inf folder and then web.xml. The next step is to place all the necessary struct jar files within this lib folder. So what are the necessary jar files? You need to download from the org Apache structs site the latest version and then unzip and select all the required jar files. So here these are the required jar files. Apart from these jar files, there are even additional jar files which comes when you download and unzip. But currently I am using these. The purpose of usage, these jar files should be limited based on your requirement for developing any kind of application. So here you see these are the list of jar files which are must and required for developing any of your struct application, among which we have commons, all kind of collections, lang, IO, chain, bin utils, all these are required, and there is a free marker as well, and struct to core. This is very important. And then there is xwork-core. This is also very important jar file. So when we download the jar files from the org Apache site, it will give n number of jar files. It means it gives more jar file required for your specific requirement. Based on your specific requirement of your application, you need to select certain jar files. If you include more than required, it will give certain kind of errors and it will not run and not get deployed in your server. So based on your requirement, select the appropriate jar files and use. And for us to demonstrate the code examples, we require these which are must to functional application. So after placing the jar files inside this lib folder, let's create the action class for struct application. For that, you need to create an action class file, which is nothing but a Java file. Call it as hello world action, and also within the package com.innobuzz. So package name can be anything, but follow the standard usage of package and then finish. So this will give the basic action class, and as we know in Struct framework, after 2.x version onwards, it has made action class as a POJO. Simple plain old Java object. You need not extend or implement any interface. So here this is an action class, but here we need to have execute method for performing business logic. So this method, let us define this method public, and this method will return a string. So if you remember, it can return a string telling success or failure. Currently, let's return success. So once you have done with this method, to show the demonstration, let's include some form fields. For example, name. Currently, let's keep 1 and generate respective setter and getter method. So once you are done with it, this will complete your simple action class in your Struts framework. So we have developed an action class. Next, make an entry in struct.xml. But before that, the entry point of Struct framework is your web.xml. This is the deployment descriptor. In this file, you need to give the filter definition which is used in Struct framework. If you remember, the filter is the entry point for your framework, where in this we use the latest filter. So let's see which filter and define the filter tag. So we need to give this filter name. Filter name can be anything. You can give anything. So let's give a struts2, and then filter class. This is very important because, as I said, for the latest version, you have to use the filter from struts execute and dispatch. No, it is not this. It's prepare and execute. Struts prepare and execute filter. So this is the latest filter which has to be used because filter dispatcher which was used in earlier version has been deprecated. After which we need to define the filter mapping. For that, there is a tag called filter mapping, within which you give the filter name. So what is the filter name? We have given struts2. And remember, this name should match with the name which you have specified in filter tag. And this follows your URL pattern. For any kind of slash star request, that is slash request page, this filter will respond or receive the request and handle the request. So this is the basic and the entry of web.xml to start your struct application. You have a filter tag defined within which you have the filter used, that is structs prepare and execute filter, and then there is a URL pattern for it. So now once web.xml is done, the next thing is to create struct.xml, struct-xml, which will be inside a folder classes. So let's create a classes folder inside web-inf. Web-inf, you create a new folder called classes, inside which you have to create new XML file called as structs-xml. Structs.xml. So once you're done with creating structs.xml, you need to place the content for your action to get invoked. Once the filter dispatch the request, the appropriate action will be selected. So the action details need to be specified in this structs.xml file. For that, there is a template which can be copy pasted. So this is the normal template of structs. Followed with, you have something called structs. So within which you have to give all your struct details. For example, constant. So if you see, there is a constant tag which takes name and value. Here the name will be structs.devmode. It means that we are working under development environment. So that's the reason we use structs.devmode as true. Once this is done, the next is the definition for your action location. So it starts with package. So here it has an attribute called name which takes the action name, or even if you don't give, it will be by default. But it's always better to give the name for a package which will signify or specify separate actions. We can have n number of actions defined within this structs.xml file. So currently we have one action. So let's give the name as hello world. It can be anything. But since we are mapping for particular action, the action name is hello world. You can give name as hello world. And then there is an extends. So what does this does is it uses structs-default.xml. So when we use this, what happens? It uses all the default interceptors for your action class. So in Struct framework, there is something called interceptor. So here we have to use the structs-default in order to use those default interceptors. Once it is done, next thing is to give the action name. So name of the action, you can give anything. So let's give hello simply. And then very important, After giving action name is to specify or locate your action class that is there inside com.inobus dot. What is the action class name? It is hello world action. So this is the definition and location for your hello world. So once this is done, we even need to specify some more elements in it, like the method, which says execute. If you remember, we have an execute method within our action class. After giving this description, you even need to specify the result for next page that you can give using result. We have already seen what is this result. Basically, it generally directs the page. So if the result is success, so the string written by execute method based on which it will direct to respective page. So here let's give hello world.jsp. We need to create this. So we say that after execution of the execute method in action class, let it get result as success and show the hello world.jsp page. We need to create this hello world.jsp page. So before that, let's see here there is an error, double quote, you have to remove that. So this is the basic definition for your structs.xml file, where you need to have structs tag within which you have to give a constant telling it's a development environment on which you're working by setting dev mode as true, followed by package. This gives the name for your action class. And it's very important if you have more than one package, it's always better to give the name of your package relating your action class, after which it follows extends. This tells that you can use the default implementation of interceptors provided by Struct framework. We'll see how it works in further course. And this is the action tag which tells the name hello. You can give anything, and then class location of your hello world action. Then the method used in the action class is the execute, and after executing the result is success. Based on the success, this result tag will return or direct to the JSP what we specify here. So this is the basic statements required to process your struct application. So once we are done with struct.xml, let's create struct.jsp file. So for that, go to web content, create new JSP file. So you can give JSP as hello world because we have given that in structs.xml. So once you are done with that, here you get a default implementation which will tell you to describe your JSP file. So here, in order to show a small demonstration, let's put some title called as hello world, and then body we can simply write hello from structs. And let's include some property in it. I'll tell you how this works, but before including the property, we have to include the tags, some of the tags by structs using taglib directive. This is of JSP directive. Prefix as yes because it is from structs. URI is so basically this default tag will come from the jar what you have taken from structs download. Struct framework will provide certain tags we'll see in our later course. So in order to use those tags, we need to include in JSP using taglib directive provided by JSP. By inclusion of that, we can get the struct tags. So one of the struct tag I'll use for the simple demonstration, property. So in this property, we have to specify the value, which will be the value what we have mentioned in action class. If you remember, we have given name in it. So what does this do is, the property of action class value will be shown in the JSP when we use this struct tag, which is UI tag called S property, S column property. And we are showing some message. So this is a hello world JSP. Now once we are done with it, let's run the application on Tomcat server. So select the project, that is hello world project, and then run on server. So here it's giving some error because the filter what we need to use should be check again. So let's see what is the filter name we have given here. So the error is because, let's see, it is because we need to use this URL. The filter is correct. What we have already defined the filter in web.xml, structs prepare and execute filter. This is correct. This is what we need to use. But here it is showing we need to use this hello world because there is no welcome page defined. So let's give that here hello world. Did you see this? It is saying hello from structs. So this is the simple application what we have seen for struct framework. In order to get the index page, you just need to create one index page because the welcome page was index.jsp. So if you make the welcome-file JSP as hello world, the JSP page what we have created. So whenever you run this application, you can get that output. So since we have not created any index page, it was throwing the error to give this respective URL pattern. So if you want to check again, you can again run this project on server, restart the server, and if you see It has come by default. The reason of this output is we have changed in web.xml the welcome file, because this is the default implementation in web.xml which gives when you create the deployment descriptor. So here it will ask you what should be the welcome.file. So here the default.jsp. So these are all certain HTML and JSPs which can be used and created. So since earlier index.jsp was there, we had not created it, but we had created hello world.jsp in our application. So welcome file by default, when you deploy the application, it will show you the result without even going for your hello world. So the welcome file is also very important, but this is a simple struct demonstration application. We'll see even more complex struct application, how it works in further slides. And as you've seen, the configuration files required for struct framework are web.xml, which is the entry point for your struct framework, and struct XML. So this is the simple application demonstration. So next is the struct controller components. So as told earlier, struct framework work on MVC architecture. So we have some controller components in struct framework. So we'll see what are those. The controller components are responsible for delegating user input. So any delegation coming through the request are handled using these controller components. So it can be possibly updating the domain model and selecting the next view for the client. So all these are the operations which can be performed by controllers. The controller helps to separate the presentation of the model and the model itself. It means the presentation layer, which is the user interface, and the model can be separated using these controllers. Centralizing controller, it means that centralizing control can realize in two requirements. First, the controller acts as a translator between client input and the model, providing common functionalities such as security, logging, and other important services on behalf of each client request. And second, because of all requests are filtered through the controller, the view is decoupled both from the business logic and from other view components. So this centralizing controller is very helpful in controller components. So in J2EE or JEE, what we call as Java Enterprise Edition, Friend controller design pattern uses a single controller to funnel all the client requests through a central point. So all the requests from client will be handled using the single controller. So this was an example. Now here in structs 2, the friend controller is the filter. So filter is structs prepare and execute filter. So this handles both the preparation and execution phases of the structs dispatching process and does the following for each action invocation. Like determines which action to invoke for a requested URI by consulting the configuration manager. Interceptors registered for the action are invoked one after the other. Then the action method is executed. Then the structs prepare and execute filter executes the result. So interceptor is also part of a controller which will also perform many things in struct framework. We'll see that in detail. Struct 2 provides a very powerful mechanism of controlling a request using interceptors. Interceptors allow you cross-cutting functionality to be implemented separately from the action as well as the framework, providing pre-processing logic before the action is called and also post-processing logic after the action is called. So These kind of pre-processing and post-processing are called as cross-cutting functionalities. So we'll see what are these cross-cutting functionalities. So caching exceptions so that alternate processing can be performed. Interceptors perform tasks such as logging, validation, file upload, double submit card, and many more. So these are all the cross-cutting functionality of interceptors which are applied for each action request coming from the client. So these will be performed one by one for particular request in forward as well as reverse through response going back to the client. So let's see a small life cycle involved in interceptors. So here we have a request which is generated by user and sent to the servlet container. The servlet container invokes structs prepare and execute filter, which in turn determines appropriate action. One by one, interceptors are applied before calling the action. So interceptors perform tasks as told earlier, cross-cutting tasks, logging, validation, file upload, double submitting, and many more. The action is executed, and after execution of the result is generated by the action. Once the output of the action is rendered and the result is returned, it will pass through all these interceptors before going through view, which can be JSP, velocity, or any kind of view technologies. Structs to interceptors are very important and already configured in the application. So structs to framework gives a default implementation using structs-default.xml file. So it has got list of interceptors. Now another image depicts the list of default interceptors. There are params, which is used while sending the request to the action. There are conversion error, checkbox, prepare, servlet config, exception, and all many more default implemented interceptors for structs framework. As I said, these are all the default interceptors. Like there is an alias which allows parameters to have different name alias across request, and a checkbox which will assist in managing checkboxes by adding a parameter value false for checkboxes that are not checked. And we have also conversion error which will place error information from converting strings to parameter types into the actions field errors. And there is debugging which provides several different debugging screens to developer. File upload facilitates easy file uploading. Exception maps exceptions that are thrown from an action to a result, allowing automatic exception handling through redirection. So this is also one of the important feature. Then there is a I-89 which is used for internationalization for selected locale during a user session. There is a logger provides simple logging by outputting the name of the action being executed. And as I said, params is also there which sets the request parameter on the action. And prepare typically used to do pre-processing work such as set up database connections. And there is a profile, simple profiling information to be logged for actions. And then validation, which says it provides validation support for action. So timer is also there, provides simple profiling information in the form of how long the action takes to execute. So these are the default interceptors provided by Structs framework. So we'll see one of the default implementation using this interceptor. So let's see some small demonstration on default interceptors usage. In earlier demonstration, we have created Hello World project. We'll use the same project. So here, in order to use the interceptors which are available and provided by Structs framework, we need to make some changes in Structs config, that is Structs XML. In this Structs XML, once you have defined your action you can give a tag called interceptor. So here it takes the name which you have to use. So we have a default interceptors which we have seen just now, like params. This params is the interceptor which is used to send the request parameters to the action. So whatever are the request parameters present in your JSP file, all those parameters are sent in a request to your action class. So this is the one default interceptor. Let's include one more interceptor. So therefore add one more here. So you can use a timer interceptor. So here this timer is used for knowing the time execution of your action method. To know the time required to execute your action method, you use timer. So these two interceptors, we can see how it works. We know the purpose of it. Params is used to send the parameter request to your action, and timer is to know the execution of your execute method. So here the action method has got execute method in it. So we'll know the time taken to execute that method in the action class. And this is the usage of your interceptors. So let's save this file and run the application. But before running the application, rest remains the same. We'll see what are those. That is, there is a Java file which is hello world action taking name and then execute method returning success. This is the action class. And then there is hello world.jsp, which will just say hello from structs, which we have already seen. And then index.jsp. As I said earlier, in order to get up your form or a page, once the server has started up, you need some page to show for the user. So index.jsp is just created, which has got one label telling please enter your name and basic HTML code, input type text taking the name. Here one more thing, we can use struct tags in it. We'll see in further later course. And there is a button which says hello. So this is the index.jsp which will get loaded once you start your server. So why it will start loading itself? It's because in web.xml you have welcome page. So welcome page here is index.jsp. That's the reason we have created index.jsp. It can be anything. You can create any JSP and accordingly change the name here. So either you can get the welcome page through web.xml or also handle through structs.xml based on your requirement. So here we have just shown the welcome page, that is index.jsp, and after that hello world will be showing it. Let's run this because we are showing the interceptors example. You have to run this on server, select the project and run on server. So you see this is the page coming from index.jsp, and we have mapped that in welcome file which is there in web.xml. Now let's see the output. So on click of this button, it goes to the hello world JSP, and if you see, it has given the time taken to execute the hello world action method. So this is coming from the timer interceptor which we specified in structs.xml. So this comes up to show the time taken for your execute method, and the parameters what we saw, the params interceptor will take you the parameter value of the page which we gave just now to the action. And that is the need of params interceptor. And timer will tell you the time. So we saw this, the interceptors, timer and params. There are other interceptors also which can be explored individually, each interceptor which are required. But when we do this default, structs-default, it will implement any kind of interceptors which are present and given by struct framework. But currently we are using only these two. So this was the demonstration to show the default interceptors present in struct framework. And next topic is interceptors, where we can create custom interceptors. So here it involves certain steps for creating custom interceptors. Create a class which implements com.OpenSymphony.xwork2.interceptor, which will give an interface called interceptor. You have to implement this interface to create your own custom interceptor. Next step is implement the intercept, where the intercept method as action invocation instance using which you can implement the intercept method. Configure the interceptor in the structs.xml. Once you have created your custom interceptor, you have to configure in structs.xml. Link it to the action. So here you can say which interceptor can be used for particular action. If you want a specific interceptor for specific action, or you want that interceptor to be reused for all action requests. So it depends on your requirement, and accordingly you need to link it in structs.xml. So before going to structs view components, we will see custom interceptors using all these steps. So we can create a custom interceptors along with struts controller components. So far we have seen some of the components used in struts for controller, and interceptor is also part of it. We have also seen the default implementation of interceptor. Next we'll try to create a custom interceptor. So there will be a small demonstration on custom interceptors. Let's create custom interceptor. For that, the first step was create your own interceptor. Let's use the same project which we have created. Within this source folder, we need to create a class, which will be a normal Java class. Call it as custom interceptor. Once you have created, the class gets created. What was the first step? First step was implementing the interface. That was interceptor interface. So you have to implement the interface present in com.OpenSymphony.xwork2.interceptor. So once you are done with, by default it as implementing methods. So you can just add those implemented methods. You see this. These are the lifecycle methods of interceptors, where we have destroy, which is used to clean up after interceptor execution, init, the initialization of interceptor, and then intercept method. This is the actual method where we write interceptor logic. So here action invocation, we have already seen about this. It provides a method invoke. So let's give some readable name. This action invocation, and here we have action invocation instance which gives invoke method. So when you do this, it will call the actual action method. So we invoke the action method using this invoke method, but we need to do some interceptor task. In order to show that, let us put some sysout statement saying pre-processing of interceptor, because here you can put all the logic. Here you can put all the logic required to do your interceptor task. It can be anything. You can do logging statements or logging logic. So connection for database, any kind of logic you want to do before invoking your action method. So this invoke will invoke your action method, but before invoking your action method, you have to do some pre-processing statements or logic you can put here. So here we are just showing how it works. So we can show that by some sysout statements, and after interceptor, what it does, it will execute before and after the action method. So we have seen the architecture diagram. In reverse order, it will again execute after action method has been invoked and result was sent back. So before that, will change it to post, telling it's doing some post processing. So post processing can be anything, like you're closing the connection or you're again putting the log statement. But this is something like cross-cutting mechanism. As told, interceptor acts as putting the cross-cutting logic before executing and after execution of your action method. Once you're done with this, it will return some string. So let's initialize this with string as result, because the result will be got from the action and we can again return that result back. So what will be the result in our case? It will be success, because in hello world action class there is a execute method returning success. So here we are doing the same thing. This invoke method will execute the method written in hello world action class and then get the result in the string, and we are returning the same string. We can also depict these methods destroy by putting sysout statements or sys track statement, so that we'll know we are in destroy method. It will be executed only you have to do some cleanup after interceptor has been finished its task. Init method whenever you have to initialize. So these are lifecycle methods which are presented in your interface interceptor. So once this is done, we are done with intercept, that is custom interceptor has been created by implementing interceptor interface. Now the second step, to plug in structs XML. So we have to select the struct XML. Here, if you remember, these are the default interceptor which we saw. Now, instead of using default interceptors, we can give the interceptor which have been created, that is custom interceptor which we just created now. So for doing that, let me just change this to the custom interceptor, the name of the class. So once you are done with this will be the interceptor name. You can give any name, but in order to say that this is the interceptor of custom interceptor, you have given the name of it. After which you have to even the class to locate the interceptor. So that is done by using a tag called interceptors. So that will be, see, there is the logic here. Interceptor, if you want to apply for all actions, you can define here. Or if you want to apply for specific action, that is hello world here, then you can define within this package. Because structs.xml can contain n number of package elements defining for different actions. So here if we are creating custom interceptor for hello world, let us put inside the package. So there is something called interceptors. So within which it will take the interceptor name. So name here what we have given is custom interceptor. See, this name can be anything, but it has to match here. So you're mapping this here to locate the class. And here the class will be the complete package path. We have created custom interceptor inside this. And the class name is custom interceptor. So you have mapped this interceptor here. So did you see? This is the name of the custom interceptor. It can be any name, but you are mapping that with the class which you have just created, which is acting as an interceptor. And we have already created this and we have plugged in inside struct.xml. So let's save this. And after this, we'll put some more statements inside action method, because in order to know that action method execute has been executed using the invoke method. We have seen this, right? Action invocation will invoke the action method. So in order to see that this has got executed, let's put some such statement. So this is the execute from hello world. Now what will this happen is when we execute this, pre-processing statements get executed, after which action execute method gets executed. Server is running. Let's stop the server. And after executing that action execute method, post processing is done. After getting the result, we are returning the result back. This is the basic interceptor method, or the intercept is a method inside the interceptor class which can be achieved using implementing interceptor interface. It's the custom interface demonstration. Now once it is done, let's execute it. So run this on server. So we have the same index page. Here you can give and then click on hello. And here if you see in the console, see it has got the result by directing it to hello world.jsp. In this console, you can see the init lifecycle method of interceptor is invoked, after which the pre-processing statements will get executed within intercept method, and then we have execute method executed from hello world action. Did you see that the invoke of action invocation has executed the method of action class, then post processing of interceptors. So this is how interceptor will apply for your request. So any client request will follow this process. And we have seen the default interceptors earlier, and we can also create interceptors. And this was a small demonstration to show the interceptors. That was custom interceptors. Next is the structs view components. So before knowing what are these view components, we should know what is a view. So already said before, in MVC architecture, a view represents a display of the domain model in a user interface. User interface, where end user will see the interface, can be graphical user interface or any kind of interface which will be used for end user to view it. And view is a window that clients can use to look at the state of the model. So the framework provides infrastructural support for view components, but does not provide any actual view components of its own. It means that it provides an infrastructure to support the view components. It will just give us support, but not the actual implementation. So support can be for JSP. As I said, there are many presentation technologies, JSF, Velocity, Free Marker. So all these can be supported using these framework provided by Structs framework. Features provided by framework for direct use by view components include, as I said, there are features supported by Struct framework for supporting view components. We have message resources for localizing text and images. There are form beans to provide automatic population and validation. So these are some of the concepts which Struct framework will provide for view components. And Structs2 provides a localization, which is nothing but internationalization, that is I-89 support also through resource bundles. So resource bundles are nothing but dot properties files. We'll see in the demonstration of view components, interceptors and tag libraries in the following places, like UI tags. There are many UI tags provided by Struct framework for better view component, and there are messages and errors which can be handled in the action for demonstrating errors of messages for end user, which will fall under view component, and also within the action classes. So all these we can see through a simple example demonstrating view component support provided by Struts framework. There are still some more, like a message element by its key. Struts framework searches for a corresponding message bundle in the following order. As told earlier, message bundles are nothing but dot properties files. So these files can be used for proper messages or framework messages, any kind of internationalization messages. So all these messages can be bundled in following order and also searches accordingly. So first, how it searches it goes from 1 to 7 numbers. The order is 1 to 7. The first thing is action class or properties. Then we have interface dot properties, base class dot properties, model driven model, package dot properties, search of the I-89 message key hierarchy itself, and global resource properties. So this is the hierarchy in which the Struct framework search for dot properties files, which are nothing but message bundle. So we'll see some of the implementation using the demonstration. So continuing with view components, there are action errors, which is used to send error feedback message to the user. So this is also very useful because you have a form, for example, and user enters nothing and clicks on submit. It has to give some appropriate action error message. So that is handled using action error. To say more about action errors, class encapsulates one or more errors that have been discovered by the application, and therefore this is coming from the package or apache.struts.action. So an action errors object as request as a scope. Once an instance is created and populated by the validate method, it is stored into the request. Later, the JSP page can retrieve the object form from the request and use the action error objects which are contained with all the display error messages which should be shown to the user. So this is how action error works. We can see with small demonstration. Action message, it is used to send information feedback message to user through using these tags. And continuing, we have action forms, which is nothing but Like for example, what are these action forms? Every web application except input from users. So any kind of application will accept any input given by the user, for example, name, credit card number, PIN. So all these are the data which will be provided for the form. So as I said earlier, these are all applications which will be used for banking or credit card or shipping address information. So all these need to be stored in some of the format called action forms, which is nothing but a class having getter and setter properties related to the form data properties. So we'll see how it will work. Next is the struct to results and result types. What is this? It's a tag. Result is a tag which plays the roles of a view in the structs to MEC. So this result tag is very important for displaying the view accordingly. So here this is used in structs.xml file where the JSP files or HTML file or any file need to be directed for any view file. We use this tag and based on the name, it can be success, failure or any kind of result. Using that, respective JSP or view file will be invoked. So these are all view components in structs view components. We'll see these components in simple demonstration using structs validations framework. So using this demonstration, we can also see the components of view components supported by structs framework. So far we have seen action form, action message, action error, so action support. All these we can see using this validation framework. So let's see the validation framework done in struct along with view components. We'll also see some of the view components of struct. And to begin with the validation, we have to have an action class. So there is an action class called login. So it just has got two properties, login details, username and password. And then there is an execute method and then there is a validate method. So for validation framework, structs will provide an action support class which in turn will have validate interface implemented and that will provide a validate method. So this method we have to use in structs validation framework. In order to do that, this overridden method should be defined. So what is being done here? The name, the username, whatever is there in the form page will be validated to check the length. If the length is 0, there is no characters given to the user name. So it tells username is required. So here if you see, this is the message directly adding through add field error method. So in this is coming from action error, that is action support. So this is action error, which is also a view component. We have seen action support was also one of the view component, and this view component we have used along with validating the page. So here we can do using add field error. Here what it happens is you can add all the errors using this add field error method, and then the interceptor will check for the errors in these stack. So using the stack of the errors, interceptors will stop processing the request and then show the respective JSP page what we have to direct to show the error JSP page. So this is one implementation. The another implementation is using resource bundle. So there is a dot properties file which will act as a resource for the message giving this key as a name. So we'll see both the implementation in this validation. So first thing is, let's see the JSP pages. This action message or action class, it's been already specified in web.xml. So if you remember, we have to web.xml, there is a login.jsp, right? Welcome file. So if we have given login.jsp, we'll see what is there in login.jsp. Before that, we have to see the web.xml configuration, what has been done. It's already filter declared, and then the structs XML is where you locate the action. So here we have an action called login. This is the action, and then this is the class of the action. So here if you see, there are two packages. This package already we have seen earlier in Hello World demonstration. So here we can see we can add n number of packages within the structs.xml file. So we have added one more login action because we have one login action created for demonstrating validation, and it takes login.jsp. If you see here, name is input. It means any failure within the page, it will revert it back to the login.jsp. This is the path what we have directed based on the failure in validate method. If there is a validate errors added in add field errors, the stack will have errors in it, and then the input will direct to the JSP page specified here after checking the errors. So all these are done by interceptors. And then we have a success page. Once there is no error, it will give you the success page. So let's see these two JSP pages. So login page, which is just normal JSP page having text field. So here if you see, we are using struct tag again. So earlier there was struct tag used, and here also struct tag is used. All these are from tag libraries. So the same thing we can see more in detail, all these explanations in tag libraries in further course. So here it is defining two text fields with label, username and password. This is the login.jsp. And success.jsp, it is just a label which says, yeah, it is successfully logged. We have seen how it is done mapping in structs.xml. We have seen the login action, how it is happening. In validate method, we are validating if the user has entered any values in username and password text fields. If there are any errors, it will be added in field errors, which will act as a start. The interceptor will check for the errors and stop execution and direct it to the JSP page, which will handle or show the error messages. So here, let's execute and see the result. Run on server, right click. So if you see, in web.xml, we had already seen and mapped the login.jsp as a welcome file. So here it has already come as a welcome file. And here I'll give username as Jeff and password as something. When you log in, it will successfully log in because obviously we have given the values in it. Now let's rerun again. Let's refresh this page and give nothing in these two text fields. So did you see this? This is how validation works. The username as required is got from the error which we have added through action, that is login action, and this is got from property file. We will see how this is working now. So if you see this login Java, that is action class, it is saying the empty field and it is throwing this error. Whereas for password, it is getting from property file. And this is the get text from text interface. There is an interface from which we can get the method get text by default. And it will take the key value of property file. So where is the property file defined? It is defined inside this resource folder. So you can have this property file within the source folder itself here only, but in order to segregate and have properties separately, which will act as a resources, you can group it. So here the property file is grouped, and here if you see, this is the key, which is nothing but password.required, which has been given here in getText method. So as the name of the method, it will just get the text whatever is assigned to this property key value. And this is the key and this is the value. Property password is required, and that is what is showing up in this message. And once if you give something, it will get executed. So this is the validation. We have seen the error messages, how it works. We have also seen the action support as a view component, the resource bundle as a view component, the resource bundle using dot properties, and then the validation, how it works in structs. We can also validate in structs using validate through XMLs. Through XMLs, you can validate using validators. So that is another concept. But this is a simple validation which you can perform using action support class. This will provide a validate method, and using which you can check all your validation of your form or application. So this was a simple demonstration for validation framework as well as view components of struct framework. And the next is struct model components. So this is the model components present in struct framework. So the M in MVC will represent model components. So far we have seen the view components in struct framework, we have seen controller components in struct framework, and now it is model component. The model controller components are responsible for detecting user input, possibly updating the domain model, and selecting the next view for the client. This is the job performed by model controller. The model represents the business data for an application and should closely resemble the real-world entities and business processes for the organization. So it means that all the business data, as told earlier, enterprise application is all about business data. So handling all those business data can be handled using these model components. So the controller helps to separate the presentation of the model from the model itself. Structs to action and form. So in structs, model components will act as action and form. So action class, the action class will contain the business logic, retrieve resource bundle, load the data for validation, and select the view result page that should send back to the user. So this class will perform all these tasks which we call as business logic, and this class will hold the business logic. It is called as heart of the structs framework. Structs to actions don't force you to implement. So implement the interface or extend class. It means we need not implement any kind of interface or extend any kind of class in structs 2.x versions onward. So it's a normal POJO. So as one of the major advantage and feature of structs framework is the POJO action and POJO form. Plain old Java objects need not extend or implement any interface or classes. And then there is the execute method which has to be used for handling any kind of business logic. This is the only method which you need to implement in your action class. So this method that returns a string to indicate which result page should return. So this execute method will return a string, success, or failure, or which it has to go for particular JSP page. So all these are handled in execute method. We'll see the usage of action and also form in our demonstration using model component. We have already seen many before where the action class was there. We wrote all execute returning success We'll also see more in detail. And as I said, there is an optional action interface, and this is the action which is optional. You can use this or you may not. There is no force to use this in your structs framework. It is provided with default constant values. If you see, there is success for success page or none for none, error for error page. So handling all these written values, you can use this optional interface, which is provided by com.OpenSymphony.xwork2.action. So as we saw, it will provide the benefits by default values. And next is the action support. So action support, which is a powerful and convenience class that provides default implementation of few of the important interfaces. Validation declared a validate method. So this is also important interface which will be provided by action support, and put the validation code inside validate method, which we have seen in validation framework demonstration already. And there is a text localization. So using get text method, we get the message from resource content. This has also been shown. So these are all the features provided by action support, and it is also coming under model component. So action, which is nothing but the action class, and action annotation. So this was the later and the latest feature of structs framework, implementing all the annotations to avoid configuration file. Struct2 has a very good support for annotation. So the use of annotation will replace the use of XML files. So at annotation we can use within the action class. Model driven interface. So here we follow certain steps where we can create the model driven action. So model driven interface is useful where the domain data can be directly set using the form data. It means within the action class, by using this model driven implementation of interface, you can directly connect to domain object, which we call as database object, or any object handling all the data to be persisted. So to follow that or create any model driven interface, we need to have action class which will implement model driven interface and should include model driven interceptor. Then implement get model method in such a way that it returns the application domain object. So we will see small demonstration before going to next topic in structs framework. So we can show the model components used in structs framework using a small demonstration on model driven interface, which itself will have action class and then other model components. So let's see the demonstration on model driven. So it is one of the component of model controller, which is model components of struct framework. To begin with, we have already seen the steps involved in it. So what was the first step? It was implementing model interface, model driven interface. So we have the project called Hello World, already shown for earlier demonstrations. Here there is an Hello World action, which we have already seen, and also there is login action. So if you see this, we have two properties, username and password. So here the properties will act as the model domain data. So what we'll do, we'll take this as a model object or model class and use that in Hello World action. So in Hello World action, we have already used name as a property, but within this we will be using login. So let's see how it will work. Login is an action, but it can be a model or a domain data by just having properties in it. We already have validated all these things, but even then we can access these properties in another action using model driven interface. For that you need to implement, first step is implement model driven interface. So it takes, you can write object, and once you're done with first step, the second step is creating the unimplemented methods, which is nothing but the model. So what will this model give? It will give the model object properties. In our case, model is the login. So let's create the login object. You need to create the login object to instantiate the model. So once it is done, this is the login model instance which is being initialized here, and we can access the same within the get model, which will be the return type of object. So this is the object model which will access the properties of the model called login. So login has got the properties username and password. So we'll see how it can work. So hello world action can in turn access a model called login which has got properties username and password. So these mappings are already done for hello world action in structs XML. So we are using the same demonstration. If you have seen, we have given the hello world and the class for the action name, and here the success page is hello world JSP. So let's run. Run on server. But before this, let's access some data. So for that, what we have to do is here in index page, we need to change some content. Here we have seen that. Let we make more readable. We have an input type text. We have other two properties defined. So if you see here, the form action tells it is the action hello which it has to refer. This is the action name for hello world action class. So we are using the hello world action which has got name in it, but username and password are the properties of login. So here let's write some headers to indicate that the model properties of login model in our example, and here the label can be also given. You can tell username property from login. The same you can also tell for password. So here if you see, these two properties are coming from login. So the form action of this JSP is hello world, and this is the action name specified in struct XML. If you remember, this is the action name which we have given, which refers to hello world action. So in hello world action, what we have got? We have just got name property. Whereas using the model driven interface, we will be able to access this object using get model. So this how it works. Within the action hello, we can access another properties which we call as model properties. So these properties will get initialized within this form action. So once it is done, we'll make some changes for hello world.jsp in order to show the result. So this we have already seen earlier. We are just saying hello from struct. It has got property value, and this should be used where it's a struct stack to get the model property. So here we'll say this is the hello world action property. We'll add one more header saying that this is the these are the properties. These are the properties of login, which is acting like model for hello world action, using which we can access the properties. And those properties are the username and password. And do remember the value whatever we give, the value should match with the same name as property name. So it's password, the another property of login, so here it just show you the result. Whatever we have in index page, it will collect all those text field values and show up in success page, just in order to demonstrate the usage. So we'll run the project running on server. So if you see, this is the index.jsp. This is the property which is there in hello world action, and this will be the properties of login. So now if we give username is password, you can just give Jeff. Here type is not given password in order to show you that what will be the output. What type I'm talking about is in index.jsp, if we specify the type of the input type, that is this, as password, it will be masked. So in order to show the example to use these properties, I've just mentioned text here. That's the reason it's showing up the password. So once you have entered, so these are the property values of login page. So what should happen? In hello action, we will be able to use these properties and then show the result. So did you see this? This is the hello world action property, which is the name, and this is the name and password from login. So this is the simple demonstration where we just saw that hello world action is using another class as model object. So whatever properties it's present in login can be used within this action class by implementing model driven interface. So by implementing this, the get model can be implemented within which the object will be written, and using this we can access the properties. And this we have seen using the JSP pages demonstration. So this is the simple demonstration for model driven, which will act as a model component for structs, one of the model component. We have already seen in all these demonstrations the action class. Action class itself is a model for structs. That was one. And also we have seen the action support for validation. So if you remember, there was an action support which was used for validation. Even this will act as a model component, which in turn will give action messages or errors for validation. So basically, there is an option action interface also, which we have seen. If you want, you can just implement that interface to get the default constant values. So based on the requirement, you can develop your model components. So far we have just seen the model driven example to depict the model component of structs framework. Next is the structs tag libraries. So in structs framework, you may always need to configure the struct tag libraries in order to access it in view page. View page can be JSP page, for example. And these structs libraries will work to give a view page. Using these tags, we can have many components for designing any kind of view page. So we'll see the tag libraries provided by structs framework. So these are generic tags, what we call as control tags and data tags. So control tags are used for if else, if if. These are all used for checking certain conditions and iterating collections or list or any kind of array. Then append, generator. So all these will come under control tags. Data tags, there are action tag, bean tag, date tag, debug tag, param tag, include tag, and still many. So to know more in detail, API need to be downloaded to know more in these struct tag libraries. So we have even form tags which are used for checkbox, combo box, and then double select, password, radio, reset, select for options, and then submit for submitting the buttons, text areas, text field. So these are all some of the tags which are very useful, can be used for designing the view page in structs. So non-form UI tags, there is an action error, action message, component, div tag, and field error. There are some Ajax tags also. So these are some Ajax tags which can be used. So these are certain tags which are falling under certain category. We can see a small demonstration of some of the usage by showing all these tags can be used in a JSP page. So basically it is used using tag lib directive provided by JSP. We can use these struct tags in it. So we'll see how we can do that with a small demonstration to show some of the struct tag libraries. So throughout the demonstration practicals, what we saw, we have seen the JSPs already including struct tags. So let's see what are those tags. If you recall, we had a login.jsp. So in this, there was a struct tag called text field, password, and this was the submit button. So all these tags will group under UI tags, that is user interface tags. So in struct tab library, we can group these tags under UI. So there are many tags which we saw just now in the slide. There are control tags, there are data tags, and there are UI tags, also Ajax tags. So these will come under UI tags. To include these tags, you need to have this taglib directive of JSP to be having URI as structs-tags. So this you can get through jar file. One of the jar file will provide the features of tags of structs. And once you are done with inclusion of tags, you can use with the prefix. All the tag libraries presented from structs can be used. Now since we have seen UI tags, let's see some control tag. For example, in control tag we have if else, and iteration tag for iterating. So all those tags are there. For demonstration, we'll go for if else. So let's see how control tag will work with an example showing if else. For that, we can go for hello world.jsp. So what does this do is here we can put some code. We have a property name. So what we do is we'll just try to use struct if tag. So if you see, there is a test attribute, what you call. This is very important to notice that whatever this has got boolean value as true or false. Based on that, this if tag will work. Now let's write some condition. If name is equal to Jeff. So I'm just putting a condition. So this is the property called name. So this property, if you remember, it is there in hello world action. When we enter in a text field, the property name, and if it is Jeff, we'll put some message saying hi, this is Jeff. If the name is not Jeff, we'll use struct tag else if. There is even else, or you can write else if. So let's use else. Else what we'll do? We'll just show whatever is the name. The property value name you can just show, or you can tell it is not Jeff. It is not Jeff, but it is. You can just use this to show who is it. So here it is a simple if else control tag used from structs. But this is the syntax which you have to remember. This true test attribute what you're seeing, it will have true or false. And based on this, the condition will be checked. And here you have to have equal sign which will check the value of name property with the value what you pass. So this is the value what we'll enter in the page. Let's execute this. So run on server. So if you remember, this was the login previous example demonstration. So here we'll try to give Jeff. We are checking if else tag. So did you see this? It is telling Jeff, hi, this is Jeff. Because the condition is satisfied. Whatever condition we are checking here, the name, the value what I have entered was Jeff, and it has checked with the constant value Jeff, and it has satisfied. It has test was true, which had true or false value in it, and then it has executed this to show us the message. Now the same thing we'll try to give something else. And just say hello. If you say Thompson, it is not Jeff, but it is Thompson. So did you see this output? And this is how the control tag itself of struct library works. So this is one of the control tabs. As I said, there are many other control tabs. This was a small demonstration to control tabs. We have already seen the usage of UI tags, and these are the control tags. And now let's include some JSP page using struts include tag. So that was a data tag, if you recall. So how can we do that? Just by using include. So if you see, there is an include tag. Here value what you have to pass is the JSP page. So here there is a success page JSP. So let's include that. This is one of the data tag instructs. So let's see how this will execute. Run on server. So here I'll just give Jeff again. Did you see? This login success is coming from success page. That is, this is the JSP page which has just got login success as a message in it inside the body tag and nothing else. So I have included this JSP within the hello world JSP, and that is coming up here. So I'll show you the hello world JSP again. So if you see this, we have included successfully another JSP using include tag. So these are some of the tags used in struct framework, and there are many in tag libraries which were already shown in the slide, but you can also see the API for more struct tags. It's always better to use from the framework when you work on it. So these are the small demonstration of how we can go with the struct tags. The next in struct framework is the exception handling, which can be achieved in struct framework. So exception handling, when we talk about, it's nothing but the checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. It means that checked exceptions which can be handled using the developer and put a exception features like try-catch block within the business logic, and all these are the concepts of exception. These are known. Checked exceptions are known by the programmer, and he will be handling the exception which can be raised. Whereas unchecked exception are the exceptions which can occur after your application. Those are not compilation exceptions or then known exception by programmer or can be the ignored. So all these are the unchecked exceptions. So structs will also provide an easier way to handle these unchecked exceptions, and it will redirect users for, proper error page. So therefore, you can easily configure structs to add different error pages for different exceptions. So structs makes the exception handling easy using an exception interceptor. So there is an exception interceptor which is included as a part of default stack. So you don't have to do anything extra to configure it. So this is also one of the advantage of interceptor which has got exception in it to handle the exceptions. So we will see the exception handling in structs. As told earlier, interceptor it has got exception for exception handling. Then exception interceptor is included as a part of default stack. So before ending this course, let's see the small demonstration of exception handling in structs, and after which we'll come to the end of this course. So now let's do a small demonstration to see how exception handling can be performed in structs. Let's demonstrate the exception handling in structs. We have seen that interceptor's exception can be used for exception handling in structs. And for that, let's go for hello world action and create some exception to handle. So how will we do that? Just there is an execute method within which we'll create a snippet which can throw an exception. So declare some string equal to null and then try to use trim function. So what will this happen is you're just initializing string variable to null and then trying to call trim function of string class. So what will happen here? There will be an exception thrown. So we can see the exception before handling this. Let's run and see the exception what it throws. This is a hello world application. So let's give some name and say. So did you see this exception as thrown? Just because we are trimming on null object, that is null instance. Null object. So due to which there is an exception which has arisen throwing null pointer exception, and this is the exception which we can handle in structs using interceptor exception. Let's see how we can do. So for that you can go to structs.xml within which there is an hello world action defined, and then here you can just use exception mapping. So here the result will be can be error, consider it's an error, and here you have to specify the exception which has been thrown to handle it. So what will be the result tag? We have already seen result tag will be used as a view to direct the view for JSPs or HTML or any kind of view thing. So we have already seen this result type will come under the view component of structs. So here whenever the name is error, we will direct it to error page, error.jsp. So I'll show you what is there in error.jsp. So it is just having a content, body content in it, telling this is an error page. You can handle in any way, any user friendly way, telling there is an exception arise or error in your application. So to handle all these thing, you can create a new page, and we are just given that if there is an error, go to that page. Now already there is an error here, error or exception, where we are causing within the action class to throw null pointer exception. Now the same has been handled here, which will direct the exception which has been thrown to your error page. So let's see how it works. Run on server. So did you see this? This is an error page. So since the exception has arisen, the exception has been mapped using the interceptor exception instruct XML, and that is directing to error.jsp page. And this is how you can handle the exception once you know the exception. So here we'll come to the end of Structs framework. Thank you.
Here we come to the end of this training. Thank you.